Now I have the pleasure of introducing Don Dulchinos, CEO of Smart Home and Away. We're excited to hear a little about the Internet of Things and how it might impact our lives.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jeff, for supporting this. As a cable guy, longtime cable guy, technology guy, guys like you kind of created the business that I got into and made the opportunities for a lot of us, so appreciate that. Thanks, Pete, for inviting me and also for just keeping me plugged into the CSU community. I'm from Boulder, and frankly, the CSU community is just way cooler than what other school down south. Not kidding, not just saying that. So, let's see. So, I'm going to talk about the Internet of Things, except, Steve, man, he hates the term Internet of Things. So it's like, I feel bad now. Fortunately, I named the talk differently. It's Technologies of Awareness. And one of the things that's interesting to me about all the kinds of things that you can connect is it's giving you a broader awareness of your immediate vicinity, the broader community you're in, a lot of different things. And I think that's an interesting lens to look at this through. So just to get a more sense of how cool you guys really are, how many of you in the room have something like a Fitbit or a Fuel Band? Any of those things? Show of hands. Okay, pretty cool, pretty fit, guys. How many of you at home, either here or back home where you come from, have a Nest thermostat? Okay, not so many. Not so cool. How many of you have an Amazon Echo or some kind of a voice assistant that you use? That's interesting, okay. And then how many of you have a smartphone? Everybody, okay. And how many of you have a Happy Fork? Everybody, almost. That's a real thing. And it is going on 5 years old now. It's a smart fork that does one thing. It measures how quickly you move the food to your mouth. And honest to God. So the research shows that the slower you eat, the less you eat overall, and it's more healthy. So I don't have one of these either, although they're on sale for half price. And but when they add the feature that says, "Do you really need that extra piece of cheesecake?" Then I'll buy it. The lesson of the Happy Fork is that anything that can be connected will be connected. So look around the room, the chairs, the railings, anything that's not yet connected, it's going to be. And that might be interesting or it might be kind of banal, but it's happening. And one more thing. Anybody have one of these? Anybody know what that is? 3, 2, 1. Smart Mousetrap. I don't want to leave this up here too. Now that it's bigger, it's kind of scaring me because of the lower right there's a kill chamber. Yeah, it's all right. So I could do a whole talk just showing you stuff like that, and I was tempted. But one last thing here is this is the Y sticky, and that little kind of bronze-colored thing at the bottom there is the product. It's about 1 centimeter square. It's a sensor. It's got a transceiver. It's a connected thing that you can stick on anything. So anything that's not yet connected will be connected, and anything can be connected. So there's one of our themes for this talk. It's a very broad category. So we kind of start from the bottom of this layer. People, vehicles, buildings, other kinds of hardware. But even natural resources all can have some kind of sensor connected to them and be generating information. So all of those are connected to connectivity to wireless networks mostly, and then you build applications on top of that. So rather than go across all of these categories, I did pick 3, kind of working with Pete. So what I'll talk about are smart home, smart car, smart city, as environments where sensors are being connected, and give you a quick snapshot of some interesting things that are going on, and maybe a few predictions, 5-year predictions of what's going to happen because I won't be back here in 5 years and you'll never remember that I predicted those. So, and then as I go through this and some of the examples I give, we'll bring out some of the themes that affect how this kind of technology trend is happening, starting with the technology itself. Everything's getting, Moore's Law continues to make it easier to connect these things. There's interesting, one of the things maybe as I listen to the conversation here today, talk a little bit more about business models, because all of these devices, all the commercial devices you see, they do something for the consumer, but the business model that the company has in mind may not be just what they're trying to do to help the consumer, what the initial value proposition is. Data collection has a lot to do with that. So a lot of these are like little Facebooks waiting to happen as you go through it. I won't talk much about privacy because I think we've covered that pretty well here. There are companies trying to own this space, so there are companies trying to assemble ecosystems of devices that that if you're their customer, you get access to all these devices and you can talk to them and do things. So there's these kind of battles going on. And finally, and the kind of most interesting thing to me is how these devices and the interfaces that are created work with enhancing your awareness. And there's some interesting things happen. And bad design can kill any of these devices. So let's talk quickly about smart home. And this is my smart home. And there's nothing special about my smart home, although I get braggy about it with people who aren't very technical. So I have these products. And so how many you got here? 4, 8, 9 different products. The Nest thermostat upper right there, and then the Nest Protect are designs from Nest, which is now part of Google. I love the objects. I just think they're very attractive. They're extremely easy interfaces to use. Example of good design. Hue light bulbs, which is the lower right there. You know what those are? They're connected, on and off. You can set timers. They have the whole spectrum of light, so you can actually shade from red to green to blue in the bulb, which is really, really cool for about 5 minutes, and then you kind of, put them away. So, but I've had those for years. Don't use them. Sonos music player is a multi-room speaker system. That brings out an interesting thing about business models, which is and this is true really of any music service, but you sort of have your taste in music. You have a device that, now I can get music where I want it, but I don't necessarily get the music I want everywhere I want it, because Sonos has relationships with Warner Music, or is Warner Music still a thing? Yeah, so Warner Music or Sony Music, and they might be steering you to some of those artists rather than others. And you don't know that necessarily, but boy, it's so easy to move the music to a different room. I'll do it anyway, and I'll listen to music I don't really like that much. So that kind of thing could happen. So business models, key thing. Comcast is my cable provider, but they're also in the home automation and home security business. I've got some of their motion sensors. They see that as a line extension of their business, going from video to voice to data, and now home security and things like that. And so some others. So it's also a dumb home. I'm not that braggy. But one of the big problems here is the integration. And so among those 9 devices, there were 7 different brands, and at least 4 of those things have hubs that collect other devices. So you can choose, the Nest thermostat, be able to see 3 devices. You can choose the Comcast interface and see 5 devices, including the Nest. But it's not necessarily controlling that Nest device. So it's what we say interoperable. Technically, you can see the device and connect it, but you can't necessarily control all of its functions. So interoperability is not integration, is sort of a theme I keep seeing repeated in a lot of these devices. Open data, so there's devices in my home that I don't control, right? So I have a water meter and an electric meter owned by the local utilities. The water meter is interesting because City of Boulder, and a lot of cities actually have rates where you pay a tier price, right? The first X thousand gallons is very cheap. Second 5,000 gallons is twice as much per gallon. and then the third tier really kind of goes through the roof, and they do that to conserve water, right? And so the problem is my water meter, I don't know what it does until the end of the month when I get my bill. And so I know I've used too much water, and I've got that high bill. The technology exists to make that water meter smarter. The city hasn't invested in that yet, and I have no control over that. So there are institutional blockers to, some connectivity that would really be helpful. And so that's a kind of an infrastructure problem that's out there. And then finally, there's stuff that's just not yet connected. Living in Colorado, we had that a couple of weeks ago, a storm. It wasn't snow, wasn't sleet, it was kind of slush, just kind of globs of slush hitting the side of the house. And we found out we had a leak in our window because the frame, it's a 20-year-old house, has eventually worn through, and there's a leak there. I wish I could do something about that. I wish that window frame was smarter. It's going to be, right, over time. And so that'll keep that in mind. We'll get back to that as a prediction. And then finally, I left the house this morning. I was in a rush. My wife had already gone, backed out, putting my sunglasses on, plugging my phone in. And to this moment, I don't know if the garage door closed or not. Now, that said, there's smart garage door openers now. You can actually get an app that does that, but I've got a sunk investment in my existing garage door opener. So there's also financials, like who's going to come forward with a solution where, like Facebook, it's free. Here's your free smart garage door opener, and then I'll, sacrifice my privacy and my firstborn. So finally, this is my privacy slide. So this is a true thing. I have a connected printer, and I got this message not long after I plugged it in, which is, your printer told us you needed more ink. It's like not, hey, you need more ink, or it's your printer talked to us, and we're telling you that you need more ink. Privacy, security, Steve, help me. There's something, it's just, I don't know about you, but this unnerved me, and I'm still wondering about it. So keep that one in mind. All right, so here in the smart home category, 5-year takeaway, which is, I think there's still going to be this battle of ecosystems, and I don't see a clear winner happening. Therefore, I think the utility of a lot of these individual devices is going to be relatively limited, and this per unit sales are going to go down, I think. However, there will be the occasional killer app and the one thing you've got to have, and those will pop out. But so that's a little counterintuitive to the message that everything's going to be connected eventually, but everything that's connected doesn't mean you'll buy it, right? So that's the difference. I think there will be a solution to my leaking window in terms of predictive intelligence about infrastructure, and this is something that's big not only around homes, but also urban infrastructures and bridges and streets that are wearing out. People are starting to figure out how to measure the condition of those elements and then predict how long until the failure, and then hopefully do something about it before it's too late. And then privacy is an issue. There are solutions out there. Interestingly, it's one of those things, Gibson that said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So in Europe, they actually care about privacy, and they've passed legislation about it. And so there's actually some tools about how you can manage your own privacy settings and do it in a more intuitive way. So could happen. Okay. The smart car, who wants to be in a car reading a book while you're in traffic? Okay, that's interesting. You can have my steering wheel when you pry it off of my fingers, because that's not happening. But there's arguments for that. So in the smart car area, I'm talking, I think, a little bit more about automotive transformation more generally. And so you have 4 major categories, and autonomous driving is one, ride sharing is one, the electrification, movement to electric vehicles, and then connectivity, which is more what I want to talk about here, but I'll make some predictions across all of them. On the right, you see so I own an electric car, so that's the dashboard for an app that reads the status of my car. And so that's possible because there is a open port in your car. Every car has it now, an onboard diagnostic port, which essentially is an API. It's an interface to access the information about the car and then to do things with signaling. And so that app accesses information through that port. And what that does is create some interesting business models as well. I think most of you probably have heard of the progressive, there's a little module they put into this port, and then if it senses that you've driven well, it lowers your insurance rates, right? So how many of you have done that? Okay, not so many. I want my son to do it, and then I thought, no, I don't want my son to do that, because we're already paying enough in the insurance as it is. But traffic and navigation is an interesting application here. My garage door is still obsessing me here, and the garage door is interesting because there's solutions around what actually having the car just talk directly to the garage door and take me out of the loop. And just, I'm a quarter mile away from home, you can close the garage door now, or I'm approaching, open the garage door, those kinds of things. So cars are getting smarter. So what's going to happen in 5 years? None of you will be reading a book driving your car because of this. There was a fatality. Does everybody know this? There was a fatality, a driverless car with a person in it, but not driving the car, and someone died. And up until that point, as part of my consulting business, I've been talking to people in Detroit where a lot of the responsibility was left to the manufacturers of the cars to figure out the safety element, and the U.S. Department of Transportation was sort of hands-off. I think that era is over, and they're going to be a little more careful. On the rideshare side, how many Uber users or Lyft? Anybody use those? Okay, so keep your hand up if you use those, and then take your hand down if you also own a car. So most of you. So I think there's going to be slow growth here. I think the enthusiasm is going to level off because of that statistic. One of the big things proponents say is ride sharing is going to eliminate traffic problems, and it's not. There's going to be just as many cars on the road, and there's going to be as much ownership of cars, so that's not going to solve the problem you think it's going to solve. But there are some interesting things that it will do. The city of Centennial is hiring Uber to pick up people, to shuttle them to the light rail station, because the light rail station parking lot is always full. And so there's kind of little interesting multimodal kinds of opportunities there. The economics of electrification are compelling. That's going to happen. Most cars will be electric within 10 years. 5 years, I don't know. And the big problem is dealerships. Most dealerships, car dealerships now, make most of their money from service and repairs, and electric cars have no moving parts, so that business goes away, and they know that. So in the interest of time, just needless to say, a lot of applications around cars, but what's interesting to me, and the last thing I'll talk about is the smart city. So now you talk about instrumenting an environment where these cars are moving through. So you have the initial application where one car talks to another to make sure they don't crash, but there's an environment and there's a city that it's moving through, and that city is instrumented as well. So there's buildings, streets, highways, but there's also the natural environment. And so there are sensors now that measure a lot of elements that you can see here, air, water, temperature, and communicate that back. There's a lot of interesting applications to take that data, analyze what's happening in a city, and come out with interesting approaches or solutions. I'm hoping that, where's our next speaker, is going to talk about that in some detail. The progress of turning data into mapping and using that as a policy tool is growing by leaps and bounds. So very interesting. Healthcare is another piece of that. And then what I guess I propose here is if you instrument the city enough and make that interface open enough, then people can come to that with different interfaces that they want to use, but the city itself is the platform that you're developing on top of. And so sort of an open data environment is going to be really important. The way that Boulder does not make my water data available, that has to stop happening. So I think the 5-year thing there in the smart city world is urbanization is not going away. Actually, it's going to accelerate in the next 5 years. A lot of smart city things happening today. There's big press releases about Denver actually recently hired Panasonic to do a huge systems integration of a new smart city. It was mostly press hype, and I was kind of skeptical. But as I think about, can you have a common platform? Who's going to be responsible for that? The city's not going to sort of operate a software platform, but maybe Panasonic would, and maybe the city just provides the governance and the privacy guarantees and whatever else needs to happen there. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting. 5 years out, there will still be corruption and sweetheart deals in cities, because it's just the way it goes. Maybe a topic for next time, but the design here, all of these things have interfaces. Your phones, you interface to a lot of applications, but there's a lot of things that's not good at. And so there is an interesting trend developing around brain-computer interfaces, and for various applications, including at the lower right there, EEG kinds of devices that are at now consumer price points. So suddenly that's a mass market device, and that's got an interesting set of applications that probably are coming soon. Elon Musk, just because you have to mention Elon Musk in a presentation, is on this. And so all things are now computers, so now you have an interface to these things as well. So, in summary, anything that can be connected will be connected, and anything can be connected, and the real question is, how connected do you want to be? So, thanks.